Today on Rappler, the Bureau of Internal Revenue tells the media to report paid campaigns by candidates. Income for broadcast giant GMA Network doubles to 1.01 billion pesos in the first quarter of 2016. And Liberal Party standard-bearer Mar Rojas and running mate Leni Robredo hit rivals who distrust surveys. Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. We come to you live from the Rappler News Center. This is your top-of-the-hour update in the run-up to the 2016 Philippine elections. The Bureau of Internal Revenue, or BIR, orders media groups to report paid campaign promotions of national and local candidates in the 2016 elections. The report will cover the period of November 9, 2015 to May 7, 2016 for candidates running for president, vice president, senator, and party list groups. And from December 25, 2015 to May 7, 2016 for candidates running for a seat in the House of Representatives and elective regional, provincial, city, municipal officials. Organizations that don't comply will be penalized 1,000 pesos for each failure to submit within the prescribed period. The Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism recently reported national candidates have already poured billions of pesos into media advertisements during the first 50 days, with Vice President Jejomar Binay the biggest spender at nearly 345 million pesos from February 9th until the end of March. Senator Grace Poe is a close second at 331.4 million pesos. Campaign overspending is an election offense. Violators face disqualification, jail time of 1 to 6 years, and removal of the right to vote. Income for broadcast giant GMA Network doubled to 1.01 billion pesos in the first quarter of 2016 after getting a boost from election-related advertisements. GMA Chairman and CEO Felipe Gozon said he, quote, expects the company's financial performance to continue to trend upward. GMA Network's revenue surged by 30% to 3.9 billion pesos, driven by higher airtime sales. By year-end, Gozon said he hopes the network's net income would hit 3 billion pesos. GMA said it secured the biggest share in advertising load, including political ads, among free-to-air channels at 35%, while rival ABS-CBN Corporation received 28%. Liberal Party standard-bearer Mar Rojas and running mate Leni Robredo hit rivals who distrust surveys that show their rise in the 2016 elections. Both started with dismal numbers, but the latest ABS-CBN poll conducted by Pulse Asia shows Rojas in a statistical tie with Senator Grace Poe for second place, while Robredo catches up in a virtual tie with former frontrunner Senator Bongbong Marcos. Rojas says, quote, when they led the surveys, they said it was the best. Now that they're down, they're saying it shouldn't be believed. Here's a quick rundown of tonight's 8 p.m. news. Senator Grace Poe denies rumors she's withdrawing from the presidential race. The Philippine Supreme Court allows detained former president and now candidate for Congress Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo to vote on May 9th in Pampanga, and a massive wildfire in Canada forces thousands to flee. To watch more, click on the link on this video. That's this hour's update. I'm Maria Ressa. Join us again tomorrow. We bring you an interview we did earlier today with political analyst and UP professor Clarissa David. She gives her insights on the upcoming elections, what the trends mean. She also tells us about this reshaped landscape and political discourse triggered by social media and personality-centric campaigns. Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. This is an amazingly fascinating time in the Philippines because of our elections a few days away. Joining us today is somebody who I think will give you some tremendous insight into where we are today. Clarissa David is a professor at the University of the Philippines. Her specialization is political communications, but I love talking to her about media and society. Clarissa,
hello.
Moving forward now,
Yes.
what are you seeing?
I am seeing just continued trajectory of what the polls are showing us. People who are staying in place are going to stay in place. Candidates who are moving up are going to move up, but there's really only a few days left. So there's a lot of the things that we would never have anticipated would happen has happened. Like rape remark,
Yes.
allegations of corruption, of hidden wealth with documentary evidence, but it's not changing the numbers. So I think there's a lot that we can think about in terms of how people are reacting to new kinds of information about the candidates that they've decided they were going to vote for. And it's a wonder how people are so rabidly loyal. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
I'm just personally puzzled.
Yeah.
Because from history, one would expect that, especially with a candidate, our frontrunner now, Duterte, who only recently garnered the votes and the support that he has, you would think that those are more soft votes, meaning they would be changeable, that one scandal will mean a significant drop. But we haven't been seeing that, and it's been one story after another. He has been at over 30% for quite some time. I think that's
And he's
not gonna
actually, in
change.
the most recent survey, he's actually increased his lead.
He's
Right?
actually increased his lead. So there's something to think about in terms of how people are reacting to new information. I think from my just cursory understanding of psychology and political psychology, this is one of those cases where once you've decided and you are personally, emotionally invested in your decision already, any evidence that will try to sway you the other way, you're just going to internally counter-argue against it, and all that's doing is making you move even closer to the candidate that you're already
That you want. So the echo chambers.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Before we go into the candidates themselves,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about presidential
Yeah.
and vice presidential race, can you tell me, these elections, what things stand out as different for you?
Social media is very new. We had social media in the last election, but not nearly as much as it's been
Now.
a player in this
Yes.
one. A lot of the fights, a lot of the stories, lobbying, campaigning is done on social media, and it's interesting to see how that has made the young electorate more politically interested and involved. I know people personally who are fairly young and were never interested in politics, didn't even watch the news, didn't read a newspaper, etc. But now they're very invested in the elections because they see it on their feed, regardless of whether they chose to see it or not. I mean, this is, with traditional news, our understanding of it before when we do our studies is for a newspaper, for
Yeah.
example, it's very, it's not incidental exposure. You read the news because you decide you want
Correct.
to read the news, you take
look.
the time, you purchase a paper, and so when you read it, you're very focused. You're already interested to begin with. Television behaves completely differently. You just turn it on, it's on the whole day, whether you're ironing your clothes or cooking dinner, naka-on lang siya,
Yeah.
right? So you may not be listening exactly to what's being said on television, but it's there.
Yes.
So that's sort of unfocused incidental exposure. And it used to be that online, with websites that are news-oriented or public affairs-oriented, it behaved like newspapers, meaning people who were reading news on news sites were the ones who would read the newspaper. So they're politically interested to begin with. They're a particular profile of person. But when news migrated to social media, incidental exposure became big again on social media. So the format of news and how we're exposed to it is now different. And so that translates now to how we are exposed to information about the elections, because that's where we get it from news.
And how is that impacting behavior?
It is making, I think, pending some more empirical work, making a lot more people who are normally not politically involved, a lot more politically involved, for better or worse.
But most people would say that's actually better, isn't it?
Yes, on
Yeah.
its face, yes.
Okay.
My worry, and I think everybody's worry who has been online in social media, is all of the bullying and all of the bad behavior that comes with it. Not attacking candidates, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when regular citizens are attacking other regular citizens based on political beliefs, on the one hand, that's free speech, but on the other hand, at some point you cross over. When you
Yes.
cross over to threatening violence, that is a special kind of effect that we never had with traditional media. unique
Were you
to
surprised
now.
by this? It also doesn't seem to be part of our culture in the past. I mean, this
Yes.
is new in these
This is
campaigns.
new.
What triggered it, and how did you see this develop, and where do you see this moving?
I think it's not unique to the Philippines.
Yes.
You see it on Twitter, you see it on Facebook in the US, in Europe, etc. Especially women tend to be at the receiving end of a lot of bullying and a lot of threats
Yes.
and a lot of misogyny, even if it's not about politics, if it's about fashion or about lifestyle, anything.
Yes.
So the sitting behind a computer and being able to anonymously send comments to anybody, some person you have no personal connection with, will never see face to face, emboldens people to say whatever they want. So the inhibitions that we would normally have in an environment where you're talking to somebody face to face, it's not there on social media. You can drop into somebody's page, leave a threat, and then disappear, never to be found. So it emboldens you to say whatever you want. Unfortunately, apparently, we have a lot of hidden interest in violence. It seems like out there in the open now that we have social media as a medium.
And what impact do you see? Any lasting impact on our society, on political discourse?
I think on political discourse, the worry there is that people who are receiving threats will they're just going to stop talking, right? So you have entire classes of people or sections of people who are not interested in being at the receiving end of a lot of the bullying. So they're just going to stop talking about politics. And you're silencing, certain types of people who could be the same type of people. This is there's a theory in communication studies called spiral of silence.
Yes.
And essentially what that's saying is, even if you perceive that you're in the minority, or in that perception doesn't have to be accurate.
Yes.
You could be in the majority. This is what they say, silent majority.
Right.
If you're silent, the people who are numerically majority or minority, for so long as they perceive themselves to be in the minority, and there's a very noisy perceived majority, they will just start being silenced. And the more silent they are, the louder the other side gets. Or seems to get. And the more that happens, then you get into this spiral of people just deciding to stop engaging. So the balance of who remains engaged and who stops engaging is the big question beyond this election. After this election, when we're no longer talking about politics, what's going to happen to the discourse? That remains to be seen.
So social media is one of the new things, and it's
Yes.
changing our behavior.
Yes.
Other things, did any other things surprise you? What's new about these elections?
The interest in authoritarianism, again, it doesn't seem to be unique to us.
Yes.
The rise of Trump in the United States is forefront in the minds of many people around the world because it affects their foreign policy, it affects a lot of places in the world, and the relationship between Middle Eastern countries and the US. And here, almost every day you see people you see a front runner candidate saying that he will be a dictator.
Yes.
And then you have the leading vice presidential candidate who is the son of a dictator. For a country that is so proud of its people power heritage, I'm puzzled about the interest in an authoritarian government. There are many different theories as to why Filipinos are suddenly interested in being controlled in that manner. We don't know which parts of it are true and which ones are not. I guess that also remains to be seen. And whether people realize what it is they want. Do they know what it means to be under an authoritarian regime? Probably not, because most of the young people now don't remember it.
So let me ask you, what are we learning about the Filipino public, about the Filipino voter?
Filipino voters are, I think, Filipino voters need to be more informed about issues on off-election years. There is the history of interest in elections among Filipinos is it's very low when there are no elections, but in an election season, everybody's so engaged, and then turnout rate tends to be relatively high compared to other countries.
Much higher than most democracies.
More than 70%, I think.
Yeah.
So, and we are so interested in voting for our president. So much so that we would never consider an alternative political arrangement where we don't get to directly vote for a president. So there's Filipino voters have this thing about voting for their president. They're more interested in their president than their congressperson, their senator, etc.
Local officials, yeah.
And so all responsibility falls on the president after they vote for him, and all blame goes to the president. It's very singular focus on the one person that's the head of the state.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I think that is true is because there's not enough understanding of the complexities of how governance works, right? So what are the issues? The issues that are clear, everybody knows about education. Mm-hmm. But there are other issues that just don't get enough attention. Nobody talks about housing. Nobody talks about jobs that much. Nobody talks about health that much. Yeah. There are many other issues. And any single president can't be an expert in all issues. But somehow people are sort of selecting presidents based on just a handful of issues. Nobody's asking them the tough questions about specific issues, right? That are in the normal course of governing a country. Because governing a country is a very complex, it's a bunch of moving parts. You have to have good advisors, you have to have good experts, you have to have... if voters had a more nuanced understanding of specific issues, then I think they would have more thermometers to use for each presidential candidate.
We had presidential and vice president and one vice presidential debate. What role did they play?
They played a very important, big role. To me, it was a large success for any democratic country to have debates that so many people watched, because before that, the spread of issue-based information was so divided by class. The wealthy had access to much more information than the people who only get their news from television.
Right.
We're not going to pay 25 pesos a day to buy a paper. Putting debates on television, and you could see the difference.
Yes.
People who are not reading the papers, who are not watching cable television news, the 24-hour news channels, didn't think that anything was new, that these are rehashed issues.
Right.
But people who were seeing it who were only getting their news from television learned a lot from the candidates. That means, to begin with, before the debates, that information gap was big.
Okay.
So the goal is that in an off-election year, in any off-election year, that information gap should not be big. Because if you have political information gaps that are so large, then the mentality of how one set of voters will decide candidates is completely different from the other.
How would you describe, I'm curious, political communications, how would you describe the state of our political communications in the Philippines today?
It's my concern about how it's done here. We've been doing it historically, is there's a lot of, this talk about bobotante, and there's a lot of judgment and condescension for entire segments of the country that vote a particular way.
Yeah.
And so all that really does is it just creates larger divides where there were none prior. It becomes personal, right? Because if you were the one being called bobotante, how would you feel?
Yeah.
And yet, you have supposedly learned, highly educated, wealthy individuals claiming that they have some kind of monopoly on knowledge and that their choice is the learned choice. And they turn around and with a condescending tone tell the poor they don't know how to vote. So how do you expect to close the gap? How do you expect this country, which is so divided across class, to unify if they talk about each other? Well, actually, not about each other. It's really one way. Mm-hmm. The people who are attacking others, the bobotantes, they don't get attacked back necessarily prior to this election.
Yes, they do get attacked back now on social media.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because now there's much more access to be able to go out there and attack.
Yes.
Before that, you get a guesting on television or you go on a newspaper. All the other people who don't have those channels don't get to say their side. So suddenly now they have a way to say what they think.
What's interesting though is if you look at the front runners in the presidential and the vice presidential race, they do cut across class,
They
right?
do,
If you look
yes.
at Duterte, who has the A, B,
Yeah.
C1, and D,
Yeah.
and E.
Yes.
I guess now let's go to the candidates.
Yeah.
The rise of Duterte, it almost seems inevitable. Is that a correct statement?
I think it's pretty inevitable. I think people might still change their minds, but that lead is so wide. And we are how many days away? 4 days away from the election? I can't imagine a scenario after everything that's been thrown at him already. What else could come up that would change the minds of people who are voting for him? What could change the outcome is the second, third, fourth placers right now.
Okay.
If they decide that they're going to get in a room and say, okay, one of us is going to concede and endorse the other, then you have hope. But I don't think they are going to necessarily eat the 30+% that's voting for Duterte.
Correct.
The question now for strategy is whether they can consolidate.
So you said then you have hope.
Yeah.
What does a Duterte presidency look like for you?
It's hard to say because even on the campaign trail, he says one thing and says another thing the next day and says another thing the other day. So if we just look at what he's been saying, it's not even clear what he would do because he would say he would do X on day one, day two he would do Y. It's all very different. So I'm concerned about the unpredictability of it. Because, for instance, the business environment and the investment climate in the Philippines and its attractiveness to business and just the normal course of operating, predictability is very important.
Right.
The rule of law is about predictability.
Right.
It has to be predictable. So unpredictable is not good for general stability.
Right. I'm
Yes.
just picking up something from our Facebook feed. Esperanza Dario Pascua, thank you for your comment, says the silent majority, rather than the noisy minority, is now in panic mode.
Yes.
I'm assuming, Esperanza, you're for Duterte. And our feed, as always, is full of hashtag Duterte pa rin, Duterte all the way.
Yes.
So, as you said, there's one option that you can see. That's it.
That's it. Right now, that's the only option that's feasible. If the election was 3 weeks away, maybe the story would be different. If that lead was only 5 points, it might be different. But neither one of those is true.
Interesting. Let's move to the vice presidency.
Yes.
The Lilo survey just put Leni Robredo up top, but pretty much still relatively neck and neck with Bongbong Marcos. Tell us about these two candidates.
Leni Robredo is an interesting candidate because she had a consistent, steady rise.
She did.
From a starting position of no hope, if you ask anybody. People were saying that she was polling in the single digits. There's no way she can get enough exposure and support to make her a real contender.
Yes.
And then throughout the campaign, if you look at her figure, she's consistently going up. She never dips. Right? If you look across the period of time of the election, all these candidates sort of go up and down, up and down. Leni Robredo is a consistent rise. So, and you can see that it's sort of, as long as she keeps working and gets more exposure, she gets more support. So I think her challenge is to really cover as much of the country as she can. And she did cover a lot of the country. The question now is whether it's going to be enough. It's not, and who is she going to take votes from? Right? Again, at some point you have to appeal. If I was Leni Robredo and I'm in a position right now of knowing that Iglesia Ni Cristo has officially endorsed, in addition to the neck and neck position, the INC has officially endorsed, and there's a lot of traditional thinking that it's a vote block. How are you going to make up those votes. And then she is in a unique position of having to be both the face of change, but at the same time
The face
the
of
face of continuity.
continuity, right?
Yes,
That's
it's
so
it's
interesting.
a tricky position to be in because on the one hand, Filipinos don't like being people who are disloyal. So she can't turn around and criticize the administration. That's disloyal. But at the same time, she will constantly be criticized for being part of the administration,
Right.
for all the failings that the administration has had.
She's actually walked that
A very
tightrope
fine
quite
line.
well, right?
Yes.
Any mistakes she could make in the coming days.
Yes. And the vice presidential race is completely different character from the presidential race. The vice presidential race doesn't have a lot of attack stuff. It's not a lot of, there's not a lot of scandals. It's all, Bongbong Marcos has always been criticized essentially for being a Marcos and
Yes.
not apologizing for
Yes,
it.
yes.
And then Leni Robredo has always been in this position where she's the newbie, she needs to be spread out. So that's it's a steady campaign.
Right.
Steady and slow and no big stories. As opposed to the presidential campaign, which is who knows what's going to happen next. Every day is like, you wouldn't have imagined that these things, you can't dream it up.
I just
Yeah.
blurted. Let's talk about Bongbong Marcos. I mean, we talked
Yes.
about him at the beginning. How would you assess the way he's run the campaign and
He's
where
run
he
it
is?
really smart. He's running really smart. I was surprised when he decided not to go to the vice presidential debate in the second one.
Yes.
That was a risky move, but it was gutsy because he is so confident in his supporters that even if he doesn't attend the debate, and even if it was a high-profile one,
Yeah.
he wasn't going to lose points, and he
Yes.
didn't. Right? So all the debates really did was sort of shift around the numbers among the others who were at the debate.
Right.
But he held his numbers.
He did, yeah.
And
And he was the punching bag of the first.
he was the punching
the
bag
one
of the
by
first.
yeah.
And in so many, it also emboldened him because even if he was a punching bag, he didn't
still
really
did
lose
well.
a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the calculation is, if I attend this debate, it's going to be more of being the punching bag. So what does he have to gain? And is it worth the loss? And it turns out it was he made the right decision on that debate. But he hasn't been we're not talking about his positions on issues.
No.
We're not talking about his history in public service. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about the fact that he's a Marcos.
Right.
Right? And
Right.
that the fact that these others are not. So in that sense, the vice presidential debate, not debate, but the campaign has been of a completely different character from the presidential one.
Let me ask you now. Tata Cornelio, thank you for your question. She's asking, what's your take on Trillanes attacking Duterte on the charges against him?
That is, Trillanes, I have to admit, I was surprised. Although Trillanes really has the guts for this kind of thing. And he does his research. I don't know if Trillanes really thinks that he can win. Although a campaign strategist once told me, all politicians who are running think they can win. It doesn't matter if they're polling at 0%.
Yeah.
I don't know if he can win. I don't know if he's doing it to win.
Right.
And if he's not, what are his motivations for being in this race?
I actually
and
asked
staying
him
in
this
race?
yesterday.
Yes, what did he
So
say?
he's, well, in
Yeah.
terms of coming out with it, he said he
Yes.
got the papers. He said he's after the truth.
Yeah.
Then I asked him, so who's behind you? He
Yes.
said, I got the papers, and this is the truth.
Yes. I would think, well, because he's military, and Duterte, there's just a video of him online Skyping with Joma Sison. So I can imagine that the military doesn't want a Duterte presidency because he's clearly, of a different position from the military in terms of the NPA, rebel groups, things like this. So I can see where Trillanes is coming from. His motivations are different from, let's say, if Grace Poe attacked.
Yes.
It would be a different reason. I think this one has to do with the military.
The last question about Duterte is really this. So we talked about the rape comment,
Yes.
now corruption charges.
Yes.
And he's facing all of these, but his numbers haven't decreased. What does this show?
it shows there's actually a line of theory in psychology that would explain it, which is that, it's sort of dissonance. If I'm a Duterte supporter and I've already decided, it took me a long time to decide, and once I'm decided, I've made up my mind. So whatever I read, hear, anything new, it's all selective.
Yes.
Selective exposure, selective attention. I only pay attention to things that already agree with my view. And if I'm really faced with facts that I cannot deny are facts, I would, as a reaction, rationalize. Right?
Yes.
So you get to that point where you're close enough to the election, people who have taken sides are committed to their side.
Yes.
It's only a small portion of the population this close to the election that are still willing to change their vote. So it doesn't really matter what you throw at people at this point, you're not going to see a lot of movement.
Oh my gosh. And so as we go to the polls on Monday, it is Thursday today, so as
It's
we go to the
Thursday
polls
today,
on
yes.
Monday, between now and then, what would you like to ask Filipinos to think through as they make their choice?
Well, I mean, it's a personal choice. Voting is a personal choice. It's important for everyone to know first that they shouldn't tell other people who they're voting for, even if they're asked. I mean, unless they're willing to, of course. Because sometimes I get asked directly, who are you voting for? And I feel so offended that I'm even asked, because it's a personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
All people have different reasons for choosing who they're voting for. So, and this is the vote buying issue,
Yes,
right? So
yes,
that
yes.
The secrecy of the ballot is the most important bedrock for keeping away vote buyers. Because as long as we can keep the ballot secret, and you can't be compelled to reveal to anybody else who you voted for unless you really wanted to and are willing to talk about it, then we can keep people from the vote buying effectiveness from being so out there. Then there's this, I was mentioning this to you earlier, is all this talk about the political machinery. Concerning me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How I guess in the past, the old idea from 1986, guns, goons, and gold, and then
Yes.
the political machinery as you
Yes.
walk in, that you cannot win without a political machinery.
Yes.
How would you gauge, are these things still important today?
There's a definitional question,
Okay,
right? So
please.
what is political machinery? And I always ask it whenever somebody tells me, but the political machinery will make my candidate win. First, I'm puzzled as to why it's a good thing, and why should one be proud that they have political machinery on their side? I would normally consider that a bad thing because it sounds so sinister. What political machinery as defined, I don't know what that means. On the ground, what do we mean when we say political machinery? Are you saying you're buying votes?
I was going to say,
Yeah.
isn't political machinery a euphemism for vote
Exactly.
buying, for
Yes.
intimidation,
Exactly.
the block voting,
The
in
block
some sense?
voting, the mass endorsing of local leaders of certain candidates at the national level. There's that side of what you call political machinery, the machinery. But then you could argue that there's a less sinister side of it, because some people I've spoken with who do this kind of campaigning are really talking about, it's literally whether you can provide the jeepney to take the people to the polling precinct, because normally they wouldn't go. So all you're trying to do is increase turnout, right? You just want your voters to turn out. And a lot of campaigning in different countries is done this way. You're just making sure that the people who have decided to vote for you actually vote.
Yeah.
Right? So
Correct,
you're
correct.
not making them decide to vote for somebody else.
Right.
You're not
Yes.
intimidating them. You're just saying, who are you going to vote for? I'm going to vote for this person. I'm going to make sure that this person has a ride to the precinct.
Right, right.
You just get out the vote. It's like
Right.
a get out the vote
Right.
campaign. If I'm completely optimistic about it, I could say that that's what the machinery is, but it doesn't really sound like that's what the machinery
Now
is.
you're
the way
being
that
euphemistic.
Yes, the way that they're talking about it. And my concern is, why are we so open about it? If it's so sinister that it doesn't matter if the surveys say I'm only polling at 19%, I have the machinery, I'm going to win. Why is that something that's okay to
To
say
say.
out loud in
And
public?
isn't it against the law?
Isn't it against the law? But we don't know if it's against the law because we don't know what it means. What does
So-
it mean to have the machinery?
Well, one reason could be that this is now a more authentic time period. People say it, people write it on social
Yes.
media. I certainly see a lot of things written by people that would never have been
Yes.
would never have seen the light of day before.
Yeah.
I guess, is that a good or a bad thing?
Yes. And the issue about machinery is can you rely on it? Even let's say the machinery is whether you get the endorsement of this governor, this mayor, this ganito, this ganyan, anywhere in the Philippines. The machinery shifts allegiances based on who they think is going to win. So the machinery is a myth. You know, people
Interesting.
think nobody controls the machinery. These are individual politicians and local leaders who have their own backs to protect. So why would you think that you have some monopoly on the machinery? Nobody has monopoly on the machinery. Ultimately, these are individuals who are not beholden to you to the end of the election
In
period.
the past elections, did machinery play a role? Did you see it play significant roles?
I was talking to somebody about this. There is no clear empirical evidence right now that there is a machinery that actually shifted the outcome of a national level election.
Interesting.
There are ways that we can imagine how we can test it, but because the machinery shifts allegiances, so this governor will endorse this candidate in February, will turn around, endorse somebody else in March. By April, he's not talking about it. You don't know who he's endorsing. So it's difficult to sort of analyze it because you don't know where you're going to get your data. And that's why it's such a big myth,
Yeah.
because you can just claim that you have it.
Sometimes I wish our politicians and our lawmakers would write books, right?
Yes.
Although our editors did write a book about the 2010 elections.
Okay.
Let me ask you your
Yes.
last thoughts in terms of the best and the worst case scenario for election day. Sorry, before we go there, COMELEC, the Commission on Elections.
Yes.
Your reaction to the way the whole process is going?
I like the way the COMELEC has been doing. They've been thrown a few curveballs, the receipts.
Yes.
You know, they've been scrambling to be compliant with the
Yes.
Supreme Court ruling. They've made the debate a key part of the election for both president and vice president. They were able to wrangle more than one debate for each race. They are trying to allay fears of voter, these machines not working, manipulation, etc. They're dealing with a lot, and it's a very big operation to plan an election. Imagine the scale of it, and imagine in the middle of your planning, somebody tells you you need to have receipts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
It was-
logistical. It's just the logistics of it is difficult,
Right.
And on top of that, you have to deal with the politics of it.
Correct.
So I think they've been doing a good job.
So your best and worst case scenario for election day.
Well, my best case scenario right now has nothing to do with who's going to win. My best case scenario is that we will go through this election and everything will be peaceful. No guns, no goons, no ambushes, no midnight attacks, no intimidation of voters. I mean, the vote buying is just going to be there, but at least no violence.
Yes.
And the worst case scenario is that people who are already very angry about the election are just going to be angry in person and not just on social media. That's my biggest fear, is that if the level of anger that you see on Facebook is seen face to face, that could escalate the violence very quickly. So I hope that this is just something that people are willing to do on Facebook, and once they're actually out there, they're not going to do anything. But the talk of violent behavior is so rampant.
Yes.
I'm concerned that it's so emotionally charged, they can't really inhibit themselves from actual violent behavior. So that, who knows if in polling precincts people are going to start shouting at each other because you're wearing a baller band of some other candidate.
Right.
So that's my worst case scenario. It's really about whether we can get through election day peacefully.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with University of the Philippines, Clarissa David. She'll be back for election coverage over the weekend, and stay tuned. We'll see you again at the top of the hour.